Hello, everyone, and welcome to Jason's Amazing Race Recap 37, episode number 10. On this podcast, I'll discuss the Amazing Race Season 37, episode 10, and it's one I really enjoyed. 5 teams competed to continue their journey, and at the end of the episode, we found out who those remaining 4 teams would be. I'm ready to start, so let's go! And I'm your host, Jason Mogul. Hahn and Holden barely survived that last episode, coming in last on the non-elimination leg in Italy. The emotion they displayed when they learned they were still racing was very real, and it's one reason why I watched the show. On to episode 10. In Naples, Italy, Jonathan and Anna ripped open their clue at 11:51 a.m. and learned they were headed to Strasbourg, France. To get there, teams flew to Germany and then took a train into France. Hahn and Holden opened their clue at 12:58, so they were just over an hour behind the others. But all teams went to the same travel agency to get tickets, and all got on the same flight and the same train to Strasbourg. This season, the structure of the legs seems to be that all teams get equalized early, start out together, receive route info, face a challenge together, then face one detour and one roadblock before finding Phil at the pit stop. To me, the emphasis this season has been on navigation and on doing the tasks. Not so much so on fighting for best flights. Not like we saw in season 23 when the baseball wives swooped first onto the standby list with a stunned Maria standing at the counter with her jaw on the floor, realizing she just got outsmarted. That was a great moment in Amazing Race history. I also want to point out a couple of observations I made at this point. Jonathan and Anna were down to one backpack between them, and I just noticed that Jonathan didn't have the fedora he had attached to his backpack, if you recall ever seeing that. I went back and looked at past episodes. It seems to me he ditched the fedora on leg 6, and Anna ditched her backpack on leg 9. I missed that they were lightening their load until this episode. And Alyssa and Josiah also lightened their load as they were down to one backpack. Are the teams learning what is essential and what is not? Are they taking a chance by doing this? Carson and Jack have always raced with just one backpack between them. Now, Jonathan and Anna and Alyssa and Josiah are down to one backpack per team. But Hahn and Holden and Brett and Mark all still have their individual backpacks. Will it make a difference in how well the teams do? Okay, let's get back to the race. On the way to the travel agency, Alyssa talked about their advantage over other teams by having the Express Pass. Having it definitely gives them an edge, but they do have to use it by the end of this leg, which means they have a max of maybe 3 opportunities to use it. Hahn and Holden referred to themselves as cucarachas, which is Spanish for cockroaches. They meant that they were hard to kill, figuratively, of course, but cockroaches aren't usually looked upon positively, so maybe they could have picked a different bug to emulate, like scorpions. And when entering France, Josiah said he could smell baguettes. I like that. All teams got off the train together and headed to marked cars to do some more self-navigation and driving. They were headed to the Council of Europe, but Hahn and Holden and Jonathan and Anna found it was closed when they arrived. Waiting only 5 minutes, they entered and had to name the 4 countries they raced in, which were members of the council, before they could get their next clue. Those countries were Bulgaria, Italy, Germany, and France. I had never heard of the Council of Europe, so I looked it up. It's different than the European Union in that it can't pass laws, but the Council seeks to solve problems common across European countries. There are 46 member states. Carson and Jack were the first to get their clue and learned they had to travel to Pont-Convert, which is about a 15-minute drive, to face a head-to-head roadblock. Pont is a bridge in French, which I also just learned. See how educational this show is? Alyssa and Josiah had the most trouble naming the correct countries. Naming countries like Indonesia, which isn't even in Europe. It took them 3 tries. Meanwhile, Brett and Mark got lost driving to the council building. Again, like lost teams do, they hoped other teams were more lost. All the while, Brett held his 1970s style, multicolored ink Bic pen, a classic pen from the past for sure. Did you get a look at that while he's in the car? Now, in a head-to-head challenge, one team member from the first team to arrive competes against one team member from the second team to arrive. The winner moves on, while the loser stays to face a member of the third team to arrive. The winner from that moves on with a clue, and the loser faces the next one, and so on and so on. So this means that the first person to arrive could keep losing and end up last. The last losing team must then wait 10 minutes before moving on. It's a way for the Amazing Race to possibly scramble the order of the racers, almost like an anti-equalizer. In this case, the challenge was jousting on a canoe-like boat. The goal for the racers was to knock their opponent off his or her boat while remaining standing on theirs. Each participant had a long lance with a padded bumper on the end that they would use to knock their opponent off balance. Han and Holden arrived at the bridge first, and Han decided to do it because of her surfing skills. Carson and Jack came next, and it was Carson who decided to joust. The two boats approached, jousting lances at the ready. And it was Han who knocked Carson into the water. She didn't seem to have any trouble doing that. And speaking of Han and Holden, I like how they call each other bro. I can understand how Han could call her brother bro, but Holden calls her bro, even though it's his sister. Okay, and Carson then faced Jonathan, and Carson was successful. Jonathan went into the water, and he was not happy. This seemed to cause Jonathan to fall into one of his moods again, and he was grumpy the rest of the leg. But Jonathan was successful the next time when he knocked Josiah into the water. Like Jonathan, this seemed to throw Josiah off his game for the rest of the leg. Brett and Mark caught up after finally getting their bearings, and Mark jousted with Josiah. It was Josiah who won, leaving Brett and Mark to wait 10 minutes to continue. After the head-to-head roadblock, teams then went to a cheese shop with route info where they had to learn 9 different cheeses and then identify them on a table outside the shop. You just knew it was something that would take several attempts, but with focus and patience, teams could learn from their mistakes and get them all. 3 teams were there when Alyssa and Josiah showed up, and she immediately wanted to use the Express Pass due to her lack of confidence they could complete it quickly. But Josiah didn't want to use it just yet. He wanted to try the task and save the Express Pass for another time. Then Brett and Mark arrived, and all teams were working to memorize the cheeses. Jonathan got upset because of the distractions of all the teams talking at the same time. Alyssa and Josiah continued to debate the use of the Express Pass, flip-flopping from yes, let's use it, to let's try one more time, with Josiah saying, I believe in us. Han and Holden were the first to complete it after 11 attempts. Carson and Jack finished next after 6 attempts. Next, Jonathan and Anna did it in 5 attempts. And Alyssa and Josiah continued to hem and haw about using the Express Pass. When Brett and Mark came within 2 cheeses of guessing them all right, Alyssa and Josiah finally decided to use their Express Pass. Like other racers before them, specifically John and Jessica in the now famous Express Pass debacle of Season 22, Josiah had trouble pulling the trigger. He just didn't feel they would get max value for the Express Pass if they used it then. But what would they have saved it for? There was only one more opportunity to use it. Perhaps that was his thought. Getting through this cheese challenge and then just skip the next one, maybe coming out further ahead than by using the Express Pass now and doing the next task. But it would seem to me that Alyssa's hunch was right. As soon as they felt challenged by the cheese task, they should have skipped it and moved on. It's exactly what the Express Pass was for, in my opinion. I also think it's related to the idea of sunk costs. In business, it can be hard to cancel a project after you've sunk so much money into it. It can feel like you wasted that money if you quit. So businesses pump even more money into the project, even when they shouldn't. As time went by in the cheese shop, Josiah felt the time they had already invested there would have been wasted if they had used the Express Pass. So he was willing to invest even more time. In general, sunk costs should be ignored as not relevant to the current situation. After they left the cheese shop, teams made their way to the tall and massive Strasbourg Cathedral, where they had to climb 330 stairs to the top to get their next clue. That's about the same number of steps as the Main Street steps here in Cincinnati, Ohio, the longest set of public stairs in the city at 354 steps. It's a challenge for sure. When they got their clue, teams had to face a detour. Out to dry or for the birds. In Out to Dry, teams had to clean some clothes in a stream using a bar of soap and a scrub brush. It required some elbow grease and attention to detail. In For the Birds, teams had to make a nest for storks from limbs bent into a circle and fastened with wire. Han and Holden arrived at the clue box on top of the cathedral and decided to wash clothes. They were the first ones to arrive there. Carson and Jack came next and also decided to wash clothes. Jonathan and Anna arrived third, with Jonathan regressing back to his unhelpful ways, giving poor Anna some grief, making her pick which detour to do. She wanted to wash clothes. And then he stood around as she got directions, telling her to hurry up. Alyssa and Josiah picked nest building, and then Brett and Mark also decided to build a nest. Carson and Jack navigated well during the 45-minute drive to the laundry detour and arrived first. Han and Holden, on the other hand, had some trouble navigating. So too did Jonathan and Anna. Even the usually solid Alyssa and Josiah had some difficulty getting to the nest detour. Brett and Mark passed them and arrived there first. Back at the laundry task, Carson and Jack were careful and detailed with their scrubbing. They completed that in one attempt. Han and Holden, on the other hand, had the attitude to do just the minimum amount required. Good enough was their mantra. But Jonathan and Anna passed them on the task because Han and Holden's clothes kept getting rejected by the judge. Carson and Jack were on their way to the pit stop, which was on top of a hill in a vineyard. At nest building, Alyssa and Josiah showed up and built their nest faster than Brett and Mark. But they all kept missing details during the build, and it took several attempts for both teams to get it right. But Alyssa and Josiah finished their nest first and left for the pit stop. They stopped to get directions from a local. Brett and Mark finished shortly thereafter, but instead of taking the time to get directions, their plan was just to follow Alyssa and Josiah. As I've mentioned before on my companion podcast called Jason's Amazing Race Insights, but this is a good time to talk about it again. I believe there are basically 3 methods for navigating on the Amazing Race. The first is for teams to use a map and do their own navigating. But teams need to be skilled for this to be effective. If a team knows how to use a map, I believe this is the best way. A second way is to ask for directions from locals. This can also be very effective, but it takes time. Time to stop and ask someone who may or may not speak English and then write down the directions. A team could burn up a lot of time doing that. And the third way is just to follow another team. It's the easiest and the laziest, yet it doesn't require a lot of time. But if you lose sight of the team in front of you, then you may be in deep trouble and become hopelessly lost. Brett and Mark decided to use the third method. And just a few minutes later, they seemed to have lost sight of Alyssa and Josiah. But it was Carson and Jack who were first to the pit stop. What followed was a tense moment while all other teams navigated their way to the pit stop. All of them seemed to be in last place at the same time. How is that possible? But Alyssa and Josiah, they showed up at the pit stop next, and they thought they were last. Phil noted that they had a rough day, and you could see them preparing mentally for the bad news. As the couple was lamenting how badly they had performed that day, and how nothing went right. Expecting Phil to eliminate them, Phil tells them, "You're team number 2. And then Niagara Falls, as the tears flowed like a massive waterfall, and Alyssa and Josiah just gushed with emotion of relief. You know, no matter what happens on the race in the future, you could just tell that these two will be okay together in life, no matter what happens. It was the single best moment so far this season, in my opinion." Jonathan and Anna came in third, with Han and Holden joining them on the mat in fourth place. And Brett and Mark, they were eliminated in fifth place. They were a strong team, but navigation was their undoing this leg. They were last to arrive at the Council of Europe due to poor navigation, and even though they caught up later, continued poor navigation plagued their success. Carson and Jack, on the other hand, who usually struggle at navigation, had a good day and found the way around France with little trouble. Alyssa and Josiah had an off day. They were indecisive regarding the Express Pass, and even though Josiah said they used the Express Pass correctly, I disagree and believe they wasted a significant amount of time flip-flopping back and forth whether to use it or not. But they did well enough to beat 3 other teams. Jonathan and Anna had an off day too, and it looks like from the previews for the next episode that continues. Han and Holden believed that good enough is good enough to win the amazing race, but it wasn't. It nearly cost their elimination. With 4 teams left, 1 will be eliminated on the next episode to leave the top 3 for the finale. Who will be eliminated next? If my theory holds true, Han and Holden will be eliminated next because they're still carrying 2 backpacks, leaving the 3 teams who have just 1 backpack to compete for the $1 million. It's a silly theory. I know it's not true, but it's kind of fun to watch. I have no idea or any knowledge of who wins the Amazing Race. So next time, there will be 2 episodes broadcast on consecutive days. I guess I'll have to work and publish the podcasts very fast to keep them relevant. And with that, I'll wrap it up for today. Thanks for listening, and join me next time for Jason's Amazing Race Recap 37, and I'll discuss what happens with our racers as they make their way closer to the finish line. See you then.